of you lovely people. Welcome to the May 11th, 2021 Upswell pop-up. I would first like to thank all of you for coming to this very important discussion about youth advocacy, policy, and inclusion. We have a great panel of young folks here today from the Youth Collaboratory's Youth Catalyst team. But before I get to the other three lovelies, I'll be sharing a little bit about myself. My name is Michael Berry. My pronouns are he and they, and I am a 16-year-old published author from Portland, Oregon. I was brought into youth policy a couple of years back by making, by creating STEM teams for young people, as well as getting into poetry advocacy and doing poetry slams. With that being said, I'm going to pass this over to my collaborator, Maria, to tell you a little bit about herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's an honor to be amongst such inspiring change makers and leaders. My name is Maria Kelley, and I'm a sophomore at the University of Connecticut studying law, social justice, and the family. And I am a prior foster youth and current foster transitioning adult. So today I'm going to be talking about building advocacy spaces and essentially how I've used a student organization on campus and external organizations to coalesce with foster and independent and students experiencing homelessness, in addition to non-identifying students and adults. And so the first part to this was asking, what does advocacy mean to us? So I posted on social media and different group chats, because everything's virtual now, about what you thought advocacy meant to them. And so they said, uplifting marginalized voices, their wishes and needs, while providing room for intersectional insight to be fostered, creating a loving and supporting community, and fighting for what you believe in, the changes you want to see made. And so then I asked, how does this look at the university or in your town? And they said public education and outreach, policy analysis, research and dissemination, framing issues, strengthening relationships, participating in rulemaking, lobbying, both indirect and direct, influencing spending opportunities, and encouraging citizen participation. And I thought it was important to bring this up first to amplify youth voices by reading verbatim really what they said. And so the first step to how we made this happen, this advocacy space happen on campus, was getting supplies for this population. Our students didn't have food, they didn't have clothing, they didn't have supplies. And it's very complicated to thrive if you can't even survive. And so in doing that, we were able to establish a strong foundation, and having those resources definitely helped us, having those resources available and readily distributed definitely helped us to be able to provide a sense of safety and security. Additionally, having adult leadership already ready and role models that younger students and youth could look up to and receive mentorship from was really, really essential. And especially mentors that highlighted the representation. A lot of our students are from the Black and Brown community. And so having an inclusion and diversity, especially in the role models and people that look like you, helped us create stronger relationships and stronger bonds. And so here on the left, we have our advisor, Alex Katz, who's also a former independent homeless youth herself. And then on the right, we have Chase and Michaela, who are not only my close friends, but amazing role models and mentors in creating caring communities. And so as I talked about before, the second step was about safety and security. A lot of our students were in survival mode and exuding fight or flight behaviors. And there was an overall lack of trust, and definitely they would isolate themselves, especially when you aren't seen at a university or in society. And so I really made it my mission to create safe spaces that allowed for belonging and ownership to matriculate into our efforts and to validate their vulnerability. And I think helping putting myself in their shoes, not only being a foster youth, but now serving my community, allowed me to do so. And so I thought it was really essential to provide a trauma-based approach, and not just personal trauma, but generational and racial, and having that social awareness along with it. And so by doing so, students were much more likely to continue to utilize and improve their interpersonal skills. And we were able to build healthy and stable relationships, which is of the utmost importance to begin with. And they were able to develop more confidence in themselves and in their voices. And also what we found is finding a balance between privacy and disclosure. For example, students would always would sometimes be, higher risk in crisis, and we would have to mandate, as mandated reporters, we would have to tell other faculty on campus and mental health counselors, et cetera. But we would always notify students beforehand and ask what they were comfortable with, while also maintaining their safety and having their best interests in heart. And so the third step was creating a caring community, but especially emphasis on the community part. Again, going back to those quality relationships. And I emphasize that because in any type of youth work, we want to make sure we can mitigate as many barriers as possible. And these barriers can include structural, systemic, societal, or individual. And so instead of meeting in person, we are now meeting on Zoom. And we would always start with a quick icebreaker, which we found really helpful in kind of breaking the ice. That's, the name. But we found that in some of our, which I'll be talking about soon, in some of our more educational meetings, we were hesitant to start with icebreakers, especially because we had youth coming to us saying that we didn't want this conversation to seem like it wouldn't be taken seriously. We didn't want the words to seem hollow. So starting with an icebreaker when talking about, Black and Brown issues wasn't always the most effective way to form a conversation, especially since these are the experiences that they are going through and facing. And then instead of having food and activities, we now have virtual games such as Discord, GatherTown, Among Us, and starting off with virtual kickoff events of the semester. And once that can cultivate connection and unification. And I really think it's about tailoring it to your community and your students. And that would be my best advice with those kind of virtual events. But in our creating caring, communities meetings, we had values for positive student development, which I really hope other organizations can foster, starting with being intentional, trying to create a sense of worth and pride in students' work. And that everything that is planned and involved is surrounded by their wants and needs. And when amplifying their voices, like I said before, taking verbatim of what they say and trying to matriculate that into our work and being hyper aware not to whitewash what they say, feel, or do. Intersectional. So recognizing, again, I want to reiterate this, I really feel like it's really important, the social, structural, and systemic factors that impact a youth decisions, behaviors, and trajectory. We're strength-based and capacity focused. So we want to have a positive environment and see challenges as opportunities for growth, and that our language really reflects that. And we're not using generative rhetoric or rhetoric that doesn't follow, a positive outcome and relevant, talking with our students and asking them if agenda items are relevant to them, and kind of having them double check that and go through that before we make any decisions, and even asking them, would you benefit from our services? And if not, making sure that we tailor our services to them and their wants and their needs, being respectful, making sure that they're respected, and that their say is important and valuable, and then implementing the recommendations and feedback that youth give us, again, into our efforts as a community and as an organization. Placing boundaries, not only with youth, but also letting youth know that they have the power to place their own boundaries, that they have the power to say no, and they can speak out when they are uncomfortable, and that they can come, they will be met with love and compassion if they do so. And lastly, my favorite is authenticity and encouraging them to come as they are, wherever they are, and really creating that environment for them to just be authentically and uniquely themselves. Fourth step is learning and training together, and having difficult conversations, discussing conflicting values, and while also forming one's own. And so I think we should try and avoid biased rhetoric such as this is what you should do or this is what you should think. Instead, giving youth a space to speak their truth and say, this is what I believe, while also having, again, that difficult conversation and exchange of ideas. This fosters a sense of individuality, self-autonomy, and self-efficacy. And also a conversation can follow, and together both youth and community organizers can see what they can adapt and or adopt to bring their communities closer. We had an education piece, which I said I would bring up soon, and where we would talk about the child welfare system, homelessness, food and housing insecurity. And not only did this inform non-identifying students about the realities this population faces, which helped us coalesce together, but it also allowed them to reframe their set of beliefs that they would have seen in the media or what they've been taught and conditioned to think. Moreover, it reminds students residing in these circumstances that they aren't alone, and it opens a platform for them to educate others about their own experience if they so choose. So although we don't want to rely on storytelling or ever exploit their voices, students did come to us asking if they could have a chance to express themselves in non-judgmental spaces. So we made every effort to create times for them to do so in our meetings, and even outside of our meetings, with one-on-ones or two-on-twos, whatever they saw fit. And then we provided training and preparation, such as skill building. We found that it's important that before youth are sent out to do advocacy work, or act on the training they have received, we want to make sure that they have practice, and that they're able to craft their abilities in a way that aligns with their needs. So some ways that we do this with our group is using creative expression in various forms of art, incorporating how they want to advocate and what resonates with them. You know, what works for me doesn't work for someone else, and what works for someone else may not work for me. And also incorporating research and response. So we were able to connect and allow youth to engage with other on-campus and external organizations. And creating that network allowed youth to have the data and experience to back up the social issues that we were advocating on behalf of. And again, this helps craft their stories and be involved in the professional development process. Lastly, for training and preparation was providing room for exploration and discovery. So supplying our students with the tools, but also giving them that room and that freedom to act upon them. And although I want to be so protective of my students, every step of the way, I realized I did need to allow them to have that room to grow on their own. And so some overall things to remember is that with coalition, there's going to be backlash, and there's going to be invalidation, and that people in power may shut down ideas. And this is just, I think I'm speaking as someone that is the president of our organization on campus. That's what we've seen from university administration, but which is why advocacy is obviously so important. And so part of it is remembering that persistence amid resistance, holding hope for youth and reinforcing to them that it may be a long battle, but every step that they make, every word that they speak is contributing to a greater picture, and finding a way to make meaning and manifest strength when enduring roadblocks and policy/change making. Again, tailoring towards a youth agenda. When adults in power are making decisions about children, youth must be involved. Those who are personally experiencing and are at the hands of this decision making. We should never assume what youth are thinking and or feeling. Asking them, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? And creating that dialogue. And then youth have led movements and are oftentimes overlooked. So we definitely want to make sure that we're giving youth the credibility that they deserve and are very much in need of. And then also recognizing the impacts of COVID-19, recognizing virtual fatigue, which I think we can all understand, and internet burnout. Also being aware of the difficulties youth are facing in an online space, in an online learning space, and adapting to their difficulties and maybe new needs. And keeping up enthusiasm, especially important in virtual spaces. I oftentimes try to pop jokes. I'm not that funny, but I try my best just to kind of keep students, engaged and excited to do this work. And additionally, rewards. We want youth to feel valued for their work and efforts, and compensation sometimes may be needed to sustain them, but we don't want it to feel as though they are being paid to be cared for and are seen. And so some of the things that CCC does are member spotlights, newsletters, emails, and recommendations for their scholarships, and jobs and fellowships, etc. So really helping them in that area. So that is what I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me and opening up this space for me to talk.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Maria. I think you had a lot of very telling and informative insight that I think a lot of people here could use in their own work. Next, I would like to introduce Ariela Taylor.
Hi. Okay. Yeah. Hey y'all, my name is Ariela Taylor. I use the She series. I'm 16 years old and I attend the John D. O'Brien School of Mathematics and Science. I think I'm gonna let one more person introduce themselves before I start on my part.
Yes, I would like to pass it over to Diamond to introduce herself next.
I thank you so much for creating this space. It's lovely to meet with all of you and see what change comes out of this pop-up series. My name is Diamond Dumas. I go by she, her, hers pronouns. I am currently a consultant for Youth Collaboratory. Outside of that, my advocacy tour is what I like to call it, has led me to be an AmeriCorps alumni, a founding member of a Black Student Union, as well as the Girl Action Board. And outside of my professional advocacy, I personally really enjoy attending local and national rallies on topics such as the climate crisis, racial justice, LGBTQ issues, and the many, many more things that are requiring change of today. Thank you so much for handing it to me. I'll pass it back to you, Michael.
Thank you, Diamond. And then I'll pass it right back to Ariella to do her form of the presentation.
Okay, sure. So today I'm going to discuss some of the advocacy work that I've been doing for the past couple of years. So political engagement, voter advocacy and outreach, political debate while instilling care, poetry, and other art forms of youth advocacy. So I've always had a passion for political engagement from the beginning of my policy debate career in 9th grade to my engagement with teen empowerment now. Starting February last year, I interned for State Rep Liz Miranda. I got to focus on disparities Bostonians are currently facing, as well as strategies and policies our representatives in state instill in order to fix those problems. Through that internship, I also got involved in the fight to increase youth jobs through the yearly I Have a Future event. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that. In addition to my internship with the state rep, I've also been working with the Boston Community Action Team through Teen Empowerment for almost 2 years now. It is a nonpartisan youth-led group that works to increase voter participation as well as education in Boston. Through my involvement with this group, I've canvassed starting with the South Bay Mall at the beginning of the pandemic and continued throughout the summer at Nubian Square and Washington Park, helping register 300 new Bostonian voters. Some of my favorite events we have held in the past 6 months was a Senate race forum, which outlined the campaigns and issues each candidate tried to address, which included policy data specialists. And in January, we also held an event on the culture of gun violence and its impacts on voter participation. And then lastly, a talk show co-hosted by Java with Jemmy, which interviewed most of the individuals running for city council. Through working with BCAT, I discovered my passion for community work as well as the intersectionality in Black and Brown communities. When canvassing in Roxbury, I met people who were undocumented, people who didn't think that they could vote because they were felons, community members who were not able to speak English and had trouble going past the bilingual barriers. I see this experience in my neighbors, school teachers, classmates, and I am encouraged when I see this as a shared experience within my leaders. BCAT helped me realize how important it is for me to be represented by leaders in my community, which is why I feel more comfortable reaching out to city councilors, state representatives, and our interim mayor. Through my work with the Education Inequities Group with TE, I learned more about the process of restorative justice, as well as just some of the disparities in schooling in our communities. I'm a youth advocate in my community and my school. I recently won my city championship for debate. The topic was criminal justice. I use poetry as well as Black femme in the discussion of misogynoir through authors like Christina Sharp and Dr. Shania Reed Brinkley in order to talk about some of the challenges and barriers Black women face in political spaces. It's tough to advocate for yourself 100% of the time when you're talking back and forth with another competitive youth for 2 hours. I continue to use my voice to find resources and to navigate this environment. I did research on other Black women who discuss policy in their poems, such as Hide Your Shea Butter by Aaliyah Jihad and Button Poetry. I then crafted poems that fit into the topic of criminal justice in order to better highlight the ways creative expression, as well as youth, intersect with criminal justice. I believe that it continued my advocacy that allowed me to win the 2021 Varsity City Championship, receive the opportunity to interview the interim mayor, and continue to highlight new forms of political engagement, such as an event that Upswell is holding today. And now I will pass it over to Michael to branch the further discussion on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, with Maria's incredible presentation and Ariella's very strong, her incredible achievements put on display, I'd like to move to the fishbowl discussion. For those of you who don't really know what that may mean, it's basically we're going to have all of us with a couple of specific questions that we're going to answer from ourselves in a way that's similar to how Ariella showed her achievements. We'd kind of go back and forth to give you information about ourselves as well as how to further things with said questions. Let me find them really quick. Here we are. All right, so our first discussion question is, what are some advocacy strategies that you apply in your personal work, and were they original or adapted from elsewhere? And that's open for any of our main speakers.
Oh, okay. I guess that I can jump in. I just talked about how a lot of Black women instill poetry as a form of advocacy, to just talk about some of the barriers that we face in political spaces. So touching on Aliyah Jihad and Hide Your Shea Better, I really adapted that into my poetry, because it's kind of like you're going back and forth, you're talking about policy, you're reading a lot of documents, but in order to make it understood by an outside audience that might not understand, fast reading, in order to connect those barriers, I think it's really good to use poetry, because then I can highlight how youth use creativity and artistic expression in order to talk about their problems. But I can also do it in the space at the same time.
To go off of that, Ariella, I think what you're mentioning also plays a lot into what I call pre-advocacy, which is really a strong emphasis on self-care and radical self-care for those BIPOC individuals and LGBTQ individuals, as well as homeless youth and others who have been marginalized. And so using poetry and other artistic forms as a way to care for yourself, to tag along with meditation and safety practices and hygiene, and just taking that space, which makes your advocacy more effective and more efficient. So I think before you even get into advocating, you have to prepare yourself for it, and self-care is the number one thing, as well as identifying what you're advocating for. I feel currently that there are so many things that everyone is passionate about, but that if you just do a simple online search of advocacy strategies, the first thing that a majority of them are going to tell you is to create a plan. And in that plan, you should have yourself first and what is best and healthy for you before you start lobbying local organizations and working with community members and local politicians. Is making sure that you are prepared to come to the table as your full authentic self, because that is the person that makes change, and that is where those strategies that are put in place are used to better and change the world.
And to kind of go off that, and also allocating the care to ourselves is giving. I found that it was important to give our students care and to show that we cared, especially with advocacy work and honing in their own voice and stepping into their power. And so bringing a space of radical love, I love that term, and radical care, and extending that to them and extending grace and light their way, and really making sure that they know that they are important and they are valued. And I found that that was really essential. One of the key parts of just starting off these relationships, because for this population, a very vulnerable population, it was very difficult to kind of be just advocate about something you're passionate about when they don't even have, a person to be supporting them, and they are estranged from their family, and they have a lot of these circumstantial factors that they can't use their voice. So I think that's one of the pieces that I bring into both my personal and professional work.
Yeah, I used poetry because it was what I was most comfortable with. And then sort of what Maria was talking about, when other youth and other adults really supported me in that and felt out like, okay, what is the best, how can we do this in the best way? Or how can we make sure that this is really communicating what you want to communicate? That was good. But it was like my first decision to use poetry because it's what I was comfortable in. It's where like I felt I was in my skin. So.
Yeah, I find that that's sometimes a misconception that people may have, is that they say, for example, like advocacy is the thing that will fuel your soul, and like doing this great work is what it makes it all worth it. And as important and true as that is, the other side is like you have to be fueled first in order to create that cycle with advocacy. And so, you know, in an area where like burnout and retention is so heavily talked about because of how prevalent it is, I think that advocacy that young people are doing for young people and themselves, and as well as like adults are doing for young people, like all of this can be applied into an everyday setting that goes beyond advocacy, which makes everything advocacy.
All right, that was a lot of really great stuff, actually. I didn't really speak on it because there's a bunch of other questions. For example, number 2, with all of that self-care and advocacy, how has COVID-19 affected that for you personally, or maybe how it's affected your entire group as a whole?
I found that COVID-19. Oh, sorry, you can go if you like.
No, I was just saying that I think Michael cut out at the end of the question, just in case people wanted to hear it again.
Oh, how did COVID-19 affect yourself going through policy, and maybe just like how you've been able to get it done? And has it affected you more, or has it affected your group as a whole?
I was going to say, personally, I definitely think that COVID-19 has made things a lot more isolative and kind of cut off a lot of in-person connections. But I also found that we had a lot more attendance in our meetings, and advocacy was almost, at least for my experiences, was easier because we didn't have that face-to-face in-person contact. It kind of cut off maybe a pressure or a barrier that was there before. And I'm definitely interested to see how we can transition university advocacy in person when we are getting so comfortable being online. So I'm very blessed to have a good experience with it.
Yeah, so I work with the TE Education Inequities group, and we're focused on implementing restorative justice in BPS. What does that look like online? Like that's the first kind of boundary that we face with that topic. And so we were trying to figure out like, what does that look like? Will it make it easier? How can we change this in order to fit kind of how we're engaging online? And the next thing was with BCAT and voter advocacy, we had these plans of like, canvassing is a lot harder, like knocking door to door. A lot of people don't even feel comfortable coming outside. So just being connected with others and having that feel is kind of hard, but I think that we've adjusted in a way that we can do it online as well.
I am really happy that you two have had a positive experience with COVID-19 and being able to see like the light. And there is definitely positives that have come with it. Like people that you normally would not reach who are kind of social media or internet based are now being engaged in this work. And then people who like were having health conditions but still wanted to protest and join in these marches were able to attend via social media. And not to say that the media hasn't been used in the past, but I think the way that we're looking at it now is been beneficial. But in my own city and space, it has been very challenging, especially where you have these COVID restrictions, but also these really big moments in history happening, like riots for George Floyd, and people really trying to take the streets and make their voices heard after so much police brutality, and like combating my health and this thing that is making history. And so where do you find the balance in that? And I still don't have the answer to that. So unfortunately, there are a lot of things that I wanted to participate in, but fear and health concerns like kept me from doing so. So just what I really appreciate about what you, Maria, and Ariella have said is like saying like, even in the midst of a pandemic, like you can still be an advocate, and that just looks differently. The work that your organizations have put into making that possible is really impactful. But then at the same time, you have like this almost like a trauma element that I experience as a Black woman, where suddenly like the world that wasn't on the same page before and valuing like my life is suddenly now everywhere. So it would be like you would have these moments during like these isolated moments where the news will show this person like devaluing Black and brown lives, or you would have like these hate crimes that are everywhere, but only on your screen did you really see them. But now suddenly like you have stores like saying like, we value Black lives, and you have all these places where you could kind of find peace and just like being able to exist as a person without necessarily having attention brought to your color or to your sexuality or to your status of housing. Now it's everywhere. You're constantly in this cycle. So for me, these moments during COVID were deeply traumatic, and how to overcome that and like, again, revert back to like, now you need to care for yourself more and take into consideration these new aspects.
I think like something to admit, I don't know if I've learned fully how to take care of myself. It's just something that's really hard to do, especially in the midst of COVID. Like struggling with anxiety or depression that's kind of just proliferated if you're isolated from a large group of people. I mean, online we're seeing things such as like petitions and infographics, which is great, especially when talking about advocacy. But then you meet situations where there's no trigger warnings, and it takes social media like months in order to kind of like block out certain images. And it's really hard like seeing something, especially because everybody, it feels like, wants to be involved in similar things. Like what Diamond was saying, everybody sees an issue in the world, but they don't really know how to focus it on a certain area or figure out like, what do I want to do about it? So you end up seeing a lot of the same images online that can be really sometimes, I guess, like hurtful, or it can just be hard if you're trying to continue on with your day, but then you're getting certain things that might just be disturbing. And there's also a really large spread of fake news, which makes it harder to be an advocate sometimes, because you're combating a lot of people, not even trolls, but just people who are have misinformation on a certain subject, especially when you're working hard in different areas and communities in order to advocate for these things. So I'll let us go to the next question, but that's what I wanted to add on.
we're a little bit pressed for time. So because we had a really good discussion, and I'm really glad that we got a lot of that information and we said all of those really important things, because even though we didn't hit, I think it was just 2 other questions, we still answered some of them with incredible insight. So now I think we should transition to the breakout groups, which is going to be 3 groups, 1 with me, 1 with Diamond and Ariella, and 1 with Maria. And we have 3 more questions, 2 like basic questions about how do you think that, like, from what you've heard, what do you see? What did you take away from this? And then the 3rd question will be about, like, how are you going to implement this? Everybody back from your wonderful talks, I hope. I know that my team had a lot to talk about. We got cut off at the end. So since we are back, it's time for a breakout share out. One person from each of the groups is going to share out basically the key points from their discussion. So let's start with the first group, which I think is Maria's group. Yeah.
Hi. So we were having a very good, deep conversation, and we went over the first question, and that was the extent of our time. But we definitely had a great conversation. And to answer the first question, we started out with talking about asking youth, and although it may seem simple, asking them, what do they want? What do they need? How do they want to foresee an agenda or these efforts and policies being made? And then also very, very great insight about evaluation practices and turning the suggestions instead of, critical analysis, suggesting what students and youth can work on from their own perspective. And so allowing them to think freely and be independent with their thought, and kind of leaving room for expansion and for growth rather than confining them to a set of beliefs or instructions that might not resonate with their own. Liam, I don't know if you want to add anything more to that.
Yeah, I'll add 2 quick points too. One was in the chat. An additional thing was that we all do evaluations in our programs and projects, but something that we can also keep in mind is inviting youth and young adults to be a part of creating the evaluation. Be a part of like what that looks like, so that they can set for us what things we need to track, what things we need to ask ourselves and keep track of. And additionally, it was this chat, so I hope I cover it right, but I got it out of the chat. It said it was important to ask young people not only how they want to be involved and how they would like to be engaged, but also why they don't in certain spaces, because this can help us discover some barriers that we might be able to address.
Sorry, my computer is being weird right now. That's incredible. I'm glad that it wasn't just us that went against time, of course. So I feel a little bit better about that. At least it was filled with great conversation, of course. Group number two is Ariella and Diamond.
So yeah, we were able to get to the first 2 questions because Jaquay kind of jumped into the second one, but we also got cut off. And so from the first question, what opportunities do you see to authentically partner with young people? We talked about how we can use social media as an outlet for advocacy, just continue that in a positive way. So figuring out how some of the organizations that exist here today can work with some of the groups that we've mentioned, and just kind of our feedback on our experiences in order to just make it better for both sides of for advocating. And then the barriers, Jaquaya talked about how she's also a poet and she's felt kind of left out of conversations, or kind of like not really able to engage with policy or what it means to be political in spaces. I don't know if Jaquaya, you want to touch on that a little bit. And we also talked about like tokenism from Kendon. Jaquaya, do you want to add a little bit?
I'm glad that you asked me to add, because I wasn't sure that's what you were hearing when I was speaking. But what I wanted you to understand was that for me, I'm not going to say want to be heard by those people. I just felt like poetry was a way for me to express myself when it came to political issues, just to get it out into in my way of dealing with it. I don't know where I guess that's it. I don't.
One thing that was important that we mentioned, Jaquia was saying the same issues that she noticed when she was growing up are the same ones that exist today. When youth are advocating for it now, it doesn't really change in the future. And I think what's important, and also tying what Jaquia said and what Kendon said, is a lot of youth are used, it's tokenism in political spaces. So they say, you know, a youth is going to be at this event, but then they never try to build a real partnership with that youth or the things that they're advocating for. And I think that that's how we can really change whether how we're advocating now is effective, so that we can change generations and their experiences in the future by really creating partnerships and changing things such as what we see on social media, how we're advocating and how we're including youth in our conversations today. So I can pass it back to Michael for the last group. Thank you.
That would be my group. Yay. We also have very little time left, so I'm gonna just I think I'm gonna pass it to Deshamir, because I think she was taking a lot better notes than I was. I was like listening, and then I'd kind of be like, oh yeah, taking notes. So because I saw her like really doing well with the notes, and I know that they're gonna be great, I'm gonna pass it over to her to pull out the key things from our discussion.
Yes, and so Michael was being so great on time, so we got through all the questions. So I'm just going to try to shorten this up really quick, because I know we're strict on time. But I know we, for the first question, really talked about like youth interns and really getting them to at a level which they can understand what things at a government level, so they can be prepared to lead that work. And I know, Tasha, you explained it way better than I wrote it down. But we also talked about Jamal. I'm sorry if I said your name wrong, but really committed to having staff that are under 30 years and really having the young folks be required to have mentors and 3 mentors and 3 mentees, so they can really understand the mentoring experience, because knowing that mentoring is so important in the work. And so they'll be able to have that experience to really understand the mentorships. I really want to talk about the barriers and challenges that we also talked about, was really getting past that historical trauma and that historical hurt. Like, I love that was kind of brought up, because that is a barrier that we see when involving young people in any type of advocacy work. And also really as far as like the child welfare system, and really getting making it so that youth can understand that language that you see in the big context with lawyers and everything, and really making it to where it's understandable for a young person. I'm sorry, I know I'm shooting through these. I'm just trying to be considerate of time. And then for the last one is really like communications and challenges, and creating more different ways to really connect beyond tribal communities, and working on connecting and partnering and really incorporating different allyships. We also talk about which was kind of like the last comment before we got cut off, was really just getting out the young people's way, letting them lead in this work. Like, I love that. Get out their way. They are the leaders in this work. They know the problems that are affecting them. They know the change that they want to see, and to get out their way and let them lead. I'm sorry, I know I added a little bit onto that, but I just had to say that.